J. Parsons was born on Long Island, New York.
No, Long Island.
And grew up in Massachusetts and Connecticut. He went to Dartmouth College, and following graduation in 1962, he joined the International Voluntary Services to teach English in a boys' high school and the University of Hue, Vietnam. International Voluntary Services was the predecessor to the Peace Corps. In 1966, Jay married his IVS colleague, Ann Wright, who was teaching at a girls' high school in Hue. Upon returning to the USA, Jay continued his studies at the Johns Hopkins School for Advanced International Studies, and later at the University of Iowa.
Hawaii.
You're right.
Hawaii.
See, I should.
Iowa's cold.
It says Hawaii here, but I was looking out and I saw this black and gold out there. In 1975, Jay and his wife and 2 children went to Indonesia, where he was an advisor to the country's National Family Planning Program. There he was recruited by the United Nations for the UN Fund for Population Activities. In his 21-year career with the UN, he served in a senior diplomatic position in Indonesia, Laos, Bangladesh, and South Africa, where he retired in 2000. Since retirement, Jay has shared time between Hickory, North Carolina, and Asia. Jay moved to Friendship Village, Kalamazoo, February 2019, to be closer to his daughter and family. His son lives and works in the United Kingdom. There is 1 grandchild in Kalamazoo and 2 grandchildren in the United Kingdom. The entire family spends part of August each year at their cottage in southern Ontario. Please welcome Dr. J. Parsons, who will present 18 months PhD research in a rural Philippine barrio.
Thank you, Dick. I don't know where you get all this information on us. Thank you. But that's a nice introduction. I'd like to thank also Ali for doing all of the slide work for me. I spent about 4 weeks trying to figure out how to do 35mm slides and get them to the point where I could project them, because we don't have slide projectors anymore. You'll notice the title. A barrio is a village, and my name has doctor in front of it. I add that so that you know that I, in fact, did get a PhD from all of this. My mother is the only person who's ever called me doctor. She was very proud of the fact that she had at least a doctor in her family. I'm going to start off by telling you what I'm not going to tell you, and more about what I will tell you. I was thinking, since this is my doctorate right here, this is the dissertation, I would just read from this and really give you a good example of what a doctorate that should be made into a movie sounds like. But instead, I'll read you the first paragraph of my dissertation. This dissertation examines networks of interaction and communication among women in a rural barrio in the Philippines. The purpose of this research is to identify the social and spatial factors affecting the formation and maintenance of these networks, so as to better understand the nature of the diffusion of family planning information. Isn't that exciting?
Yeah, it's about women.
Sorry?
I said, yeah, it's about women.
It's about women. It's about women. But I was going to go into the methodological part where we talk about factor analysis, feeding into canonical analysis, so we can do dyactic analysis. And I reread this, and I didn't understand it any better now than I did at the time I wrote it. So we won't talk too much about my dissertation as such. I thought instead we would focus on some of the external factors that affected our life and my research in the Philippines. Now, we'll just back up a little bit. How many of you have done a dissertation? How many of you have written? Oh, wow. Oh, well, it doesn't surprise me. In this village, there are a lot of people who've written dissertations. But what is the one characteristic that's found across all dissertations?
Pain.
Pain? Yes.
Volume.
Volume. You want me to speak louder? All right, I can do that. You'll be surprised.
Most of them end up ABD.
Yes, most dissertations end up A, B, D, all but done. But actually, a dissertation is supposed to be a research on some topic for which there's not much information or any information at all. It has to be a unique contribution to the field. Well, we were in Hawaii. I was at the University of Hawaii at the time, and I was studying communication and how innovation, how new ideas spread in our communities. It's a spatial studies, the use of space. How does space affect the communication of new ideas? And I had finished my examinations for the PhD. Was at that point I had to pick a topic. Well, I couldn't think of anything that no one had already written about in the field of communication. So one night, I picked up the Honolulu newspaper, and on the back side of the front section was a story about the role of the Jesuit priests in the Philippines in the spread of family planning information. And I thought, oh! So I went and I checked, I Googled, we didn't have Google then, but I checked, and sure enough, there was nothing that had been written on the spatial or the diffusion of family planning information or services. So I thought, yes, I've got a topic. Great. Where am I going to do it? Well, I had been in Vietnam as a teacher, and I knew I wanted to go back to Asia. Originally thought I'd do a study of the Vietnamese who live in northeast Thailand, and this, of course, was during the Vietnam War. And I was advised that it might not be such a good idea to go look at Vietnamese living in Thailand during the war. You might be thought of as CIA or something else. I might have lost my life. So I looked at Philippines was an ideal place. And we had a student at the East-West Center from the Philippines. She was the daughter of a Philippine Court of Appeals judge. Very influential family. But Lulu was saying, Jay, you're going to want to go to Asia and do your research. Why don't you come to the Philippines? You don't have a language problem because everyone in the Philippines speaks English. Well, that's true. I've got a place that we come from in the Philippines. They'd love to have you come and do your study there. So Lou Luterio was very influential in helping me decide where to go to do this study. Language was important. The use of English. The fact that everyone, well, sort of, but not everyone, spoke English. Selecting and getting support. Well, I was fortunate. I had a scholarship from the University of Hawaii, the East-West Center, that would permit me to go live overseas, do my research, come back and give me some more money to write up my research and finish my doctorate. So I was very lucky, very lucky. Dad was a small town banker, and one day someone came into the bank from a neighboring village, Litchfield, and announced, or met my dad, and said he lives in the Philippines. And Dad said, oh, my son and his family are going to the Philippines. Chuck Shields said, oh, wonderful, have them look me up when you get to the Philippines. And well, Chick turned out to be a very high-ranking individual in the U.S. Embassy. And they lived in a gated community in Manila. They had air conditioning, they had running water, they had access to doctors, and they were an ideal family to back us up living in a barrio. So I had my soldiers lined up, and we had our resources, and we took off for the Philippines. Kind of. My friends from the university came out to say goodbye to us at the airport, all decked out in our leis, and the Honolulu airport was really a lovely one. It had an outdoor area with palm trees and a pond and what have you. And we're meeting with my colleagues from the university, and Allison, who's all dressed up, is my daughter there, wanders off and goes to play with the ducks. And she comes back covered with duck poop. We're just about to get on the Pan Am flight to take us to Manila. 18 hours. Well, thankfully my wife was always prepared, had another set of clothing for Allison, and was able to get her all cleaned up and ready to go. She looked very pretty in this picture, but it didn't look so good after she met the ducks. Unfortunately, this is not a very dark map, but this is a map of the Philippines. Up in the right-hand corner is a map of the island of Marinduque, which, I will climb the stairs or I'll fall on my face. There's a little spot in the middle, just below Luzon Island. That dot is Marinduque, about 150 miles south of Manila. A beautiful, beautiful little place that time has pretty much passed. Very traditional. The island is broken up into counties, and we were in the county of Buac. There were about 5 or 6 counties on Marinduque Island. And Buac City was down sort of in the lower portion. That was the capital of that particular island. And then the road goes out, and you'll see the name Buliasnin. And that's the name of the village that we ultimately chose to do the research in. Marinduque is a beautiful island. It's tropical, it's volcanic, it has beautiful mountains and palm trees, it has beautiful beaches. Rice production is a large part of its economy. You have terraced rice fields, rather small, but we didn't have the big plantations that you found in many other Asian countries. But these were plantations that individual families could take care of and grow the rice. Not much in terms of mechanical plowing. Water buffaloes were very much part of it. Coconuts, very much part of the island economy. You fly in, and it was a beautiful, the coconuts were all sort of the same height, and it gave a softness to the landscape. And you looked across this, and it was very pretty. Of course, the coconuts were harvested for the meat, the copra, and that copra was then smoked and then sold as dried copra for coconut oil. They squeeze that for coconut oil. It's also good for drinking. Wonderful. Out, hot day, cut down a coconut, drink it. Wonderful, refreshing drink. It's also, well, part of the drinking is coconuts at the top, at the fronds, have flowers that become more fronds. Well, if you take that flower before it opens up, you cut the end off of it, and you put an empty tube under it, it will drip sap into that tube. That sap is called tuba. When you first tap the coconut tree, the tuba is very sweet, very sweet. As the day progresses, when you get to lunchtime, it's starting to bubble. It's beginning to ferment, and it's quite nice. By mid-afternoon, it's gotten a little sharp, but by evening time, catch some fish, grill the fish, dip the fish into the vinegar of the tuba, and you've got a wonderful meal. Tuba is a very good, coconuts are a very good product for a place like Motunduke. We also have fishing. The outrigger, banca, the boats, all over the island, every little community on the shorefront had their own bancas. Kids were out early in the morning. The fishermen would come in with their nets, lay them on the beach, and the kids would come. So, pretty much an agricultural economy. No industry as such. Now, we got to Motunduke and we got to Boac. Oh, I forgot to mention Boac, the name of the municipality we were in, B-O-A-C, Boac. For the longest time, we couldn't figure out why we were not getting any mail. My parents, Anne's parents, the university, we got nothing from Boac. Turns out all of that mail was going to the British Overseas Air Corporation in Manila. That was the only Boac people knew. We went and we finally got our mail and we got that straightened out. But Boac was the place that we worked out of. And I was looking for a village that was sort of characteristic of different settings. I wanted a little bit of, quote, suburban, in the sense of built up. I wanted some rice, people involved in rice. I wanted some fishing people. I wanted some people who were doing the copra industry, because my study really needed as much variation among people as I could get. So, through a friend, we selected the town of Buliasnin to do our work. But before I did that, I had to find someone to help me because, oh, you can do your work in the Philippines. Everyone speaks English. Well, I got to the Philippines and not everybody spoke English. In fact, there weren't very many people at all in the village who spoke English. If I was in town, okay, I could have gotten away with it. But in the village, there weren't that many people who spoke English. So I had to find help. We were walking, I think, second day we were in Boac. We're walking down the street, and we got Allison, 2 years old, on my shoulders, walking down the street. And, well, here's a picture of Boac from the church. You can see it's just one street, really, with houses on both sides, looking off into the mountains with the coconut palms from the church. Fairly simple village. We're walking down the street with Allison on my shoulders on a Sunday afternoon, and this young Filipino boy comes up, says, "Hi, how are you?" Starts to flirt with 2-year-old Allison. Suddenly, Peter Maduro came into my life. I looked at Peter, I talked to Peter. He was a high school graduate, not a college graduate, but he was outgoing and what have. "Peter, would you like a job?" I hired Peter on the spot to be my field worker, to help me in the village, to ask all the questions I was supposed to be able to ask in English, but the people wouldn't understand. So, we met Peter, and Peter came, as I said, the first or second day we were in Bois. The first night we were in Bois, we stayed at the Bois Hotel. It's a fairly simple structure, but it was fine. In the middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning, I would wake up, and someone is in the house, in the room, with my wife and my daughter and me, looking like they're going to try to rob us or something. I jumped out of bed, and I grabbed him, and I forced him out. I was going to throw him down the stairs, and he said, "Please, no." Well, it turned out a bunch of college kids were home, and they got drunk. And they thought it would be fun to ransack the room of the only foreigner that they knew on the island. So we got through that. But in the process, word spread quickly in this community that we had been attacked by these kids. Well, thank goodness, because we met then the Santo Domingos, who were owners of large coconut area. They were wealthy patrons of the village. They came to our rescue and they said, "Look, you come with us, stay at our beach house, we'll take care of you," etc. And for the whole time we were in Marinduque, the Santo Domingos were there to support us. The other thing about the first night or so in the hotel was dinner. We went to dinner and we were served a soup, a fish soup, and it had a head in it, and it had a tail in it. And my wife and I looked at each other and said, "We're paying for a head and a tail?" Well, you know, even after 2 years in Vietnam, we were not very sensitive to local culture. It turns out the fish head soup is the most delicious, prized dish you can serve anyone in the Philippines. We ate it, and we finally learned, and then we discovered we're supposed to love it, so we did. We were never very full after our soup meal, but it was fine. Okay, what did I do? Peter Monturo on that side, as Sandy would say, and Sylvia on this side. Peter, I told you, we met walking down the street, and I hired him on the spot. Sylvia was a friend of a doctor from the next village, and Sylvia was recommended to us. She came from another town, so she would commute down to Bois. And so the two of them were my outreach to the village. They were the ones who took what I was asking in English and translated it into Tagalog. I spoke enough Tagalog to know when they got the wrong answer, or at least they wrote the wrong answer. But I wasn't good enough to actually ask the question. Without Peter and without Sylvia, I would never have been able to do this. It was absolutely impossible. They worked together. They worked with the villagers to ask all these multitude of rather sensitive questions. I was asking about what we call CAP, knowledge, attitude, and practice of family planning. Well, try asking some family planning questions that aren't sensitive. Well, they were able to do that, and they worked together as a very good team. Peter, just a few years later, Peter still lives. I communicate with Peter. They've just gone through a terrible typhoon, but Peter's still around, and we've known and worked with him together over the years. He's been a wonderful friend. This is a map of Buliasnin, the name of the village that I did my doctoral research in. At the top is the ocean, or the sea. It's a long village. You can see the dots along the road that goes north and south. Most people lived in the southern portion of the village, but were scattered throughout. So the southern portion tended to be the place where people from the businesses in town, the banker, the baker, the shop owner, the teachers, that's where they would live primarily. You move into the midsection, you get people who were farmers, mostly farmers. And then as it got closer to the ocean, of course, you had fishermen. So I had a nice village that had a nice mix of occupations, because in communication, we're trying to find out what is it that makes people or allows people to communicate. Similarity of background, of course, is part of it. And so I wanted as much diversity as I could get. The next question was, where are we going to live? Well, in this town, we got word that there was a teacher, a principal of one of the elementary schools, and his wife, who was also a teacher, and they had a house with a second story, and we could go live there. Well, so we went and met the Misianos, Mr. Misiano and his wife, and Heel, their son, who was just a little bit, well, a couple years older than Allison. And we developed a friendship, and they invited us to live in the second floor of their house. Of course, we had no electricity. We had no running water. I had a 2-year-old daughter who was on diapers, cloth diapers. We didn't have other diapers in those days. But it worked out. We were able to survive and survive quite well. The Misianos were really very funny. He was very shrewd. He mortgaged, actually bought land or mortgaged land from farmers who had to sell it. And so he had a lot of rice land. And he always had piled downstairs in the entryway, big piles of bags of rice. But the house itself was rather primitive. It wasn't painted, it wasn't attractive. I asked him once, why don't you paint your house? You could, live a little bit better. Well, if I painted my house, I would have every relative and every relative of relative at my door asking for money. I want to keep my profile as low as possible. This was very true for most of Southeast Asia, in fact. The Misianos were fun. We had the upstairs. We had them come up one evening early in our stay, and we were chatting, and Mr. Misiano said, excuse me, I've got to go feed the figs. Okay, please go feed the figs. What does he mean by feed the figs? Well, Filipinos have trouble with a P sound, and so he had to go out and really feed the pigs, but he was, in our idea, feeding these fruit on the tree. As I said, we were in a village asking rather sensitive questions. We needed support, we needed approval from the powers that be. Oh, I forgot to mention, we were the star attraction in the Misiano's house. This was the gate into the house. And quite often, we would have half the village, or most of the village, standing at the gate, looking mostly at Allison, who was probably doing a dance at the time. But we were constantly in a fishbowl. We needed the approval of the powers that be. Mrs. Valentino, as she called, was the captain of the barrio. She was elected to represent the barrio in local government. She was a wonderful 70-year-old widow, very outgoing, and so we went to meet Mrs. Valentino and explained to her this study, the sensitive study that we wanted to conduct. And she thought, okay, this is something, because it's dealing with women's health and family planning, this is something that she could support and she would support. So she gave her approval to this. It was fine to get her support, but It turned out that in my village of Buliasnin, the only other foreigner who was there, or who had been there, was a missionary, a Protestant missionary trying to convert Catholic villagers to Protestantism. So for the first couple of weeks, I had some difficulty in the village because everyone thought, he's a missionary, we're going to stay away from him. You don't want that kind of a reputation if you've got to get sensitive information about people. How did we do our work? Well, we used a technique called participant observation. Anyone who's an anthropologist will have known this expression. You live in a situation, you participate with the people in their life, and you write up what you see. I supplemented this with a lot of questionnaires about CAP, knowledge, attitude, practice of family planning, a lot of questions about their socioeconomic status, because I wanted to see the effect that similar backgrounds had on communication, etc. So it was a combination of being with the people and conducting paper exams. The census was the first thing we did. It was easy. Just count all of the people in the village. I needed to identify all of the women of reproductive age, namely the women aged 15 to 48. So to do that, I had to do a census and then identify the population that I wanted to focus on. I wanted communication within that group about family planning. Getting the approval or the acceptance of the village was greatly aided by this little munchkin, Allison, my daughter. You can see she's got very light blonde hair, very white skin. Filipinos loved her, absolutely loved her. We'd bring her into the house, set her up on the table, feed her candies, and she would dance. And she was just the icebreaker of the village. She just let us go almost anywhere. She was so loved that her hair was so fine. You know, you can't imagine a little kid with blonde hair. It's just so fine. They all loved to comb it. Oh, they would feed her candies and comb her hair. Well, she got a good case of head lice from this. We were unsure as to what to do. We're in a village. We sent her to Manila. Anne and Allison went up to Manila to stay with the Shields, and they're friends of ours in the embassy, and went to see a very famous doctor, children's doctor. And at Banawe Health Center, they prescribed some ointment with mercury in it to get rid of with mercury to get rid of the lice. And we didn't think that sounded like such a great thing to be putting on a 2-year-old's head. So we didn't put it on. We brought her back, and all the villagers said, oh, no, you don't put that on your head. You bring her to us, and we will comb through with our fingers each strand of hair, taking out the lice and the eggs. And Allison will love it. It's like petting a dog. Oh, more. It was the only way to get rid of the lice. But it was the Mario way to get rid of the lice. There's some interesting things that are preconceptions about people who live in a barrio, in a village. What have I got? They love celebrations. This is a birthday celebration for my wife in May. They dance, they sing, and they do a lot of cooking. Anything that will get people together and provide food. They don't get a lot of food. They have enough. They're not starving, but they don't get much variety. So a birthday party is a wonderful way to get lots of food. The men cook, the women cook, they all join in to have a major celebration. One of the prejudices, I suppose, people have about villagers. Was that villagers are stubborn, are not very well educated, are difficult people. Well, this was a family that we worked with who became very close friends, the Hordans. He was trained by Thomasites, teachers. Now, do you know the Thomasite group? They came to the Philippines on a ship called the Thomas, and therefore they were called Thomasites. They were not religious, they were Thomasites. They came at the time, the turn of the century, when the Philippines became a colony of the United States. They came and they taught English in the school system. They taught English everywhere in the country. The Hordans could quote to me stories from Mark Twain, or the Headless Horseman and whatever, the Hollow.
Ichabod.
Yes, Ichabod Crane. They knew American literature. They were well informed about that. They were not stupid, lazy people. They were hard workers. But we also had people who liked barrio life and sort of were very laid back in their barrio life. It was easy to be laid back in a barrio like Buliasnin, where the soil was rich, things grew easily. The Molinas had something like 10 or 12 children. Mrs. Molina cooked fantastic meals, but had no work. And her husband was out collecting food for the family. They're in a rice paddy. He's collecting cohol, snails. Thank you, Allison. Collecting snails, and they're eating off the land. It's all there. It's all free. They were very laid back, but very different from the Hordans. All right. As I said, these prejudices about the villagers carried over, or came from, if you will, the cities. And Manila was a very elite city that looked down on the peasants of the Philippines and really thought they were really quite stupid. I was collecting information about the practice of family planning, and this is a Catholic country. These people were doing all sorts of things to prevent getting pregnant. Some really weird things. Or if they did get pregnant, they did strange things to try to get rid of that pregnancy. So I'm finding this information in my interviews. Went up to Manila to talk to the leaders of the population community. We had Mercedes Concepcion from the university. Imagine a name like Concepcion working in the field of population. We had Cardinal Sin from the church, who had very strong feelings on population. I would explain to them, look, these people are doing all sorts of things to try to prevent or end a pregnancy. What are you doing to give them the means? Oh, no. They don't want the means. They just want to have lots of babies. They're there just to have babies. There was an obvious disconnect between what the elite in Manila, who were running the family planning program, thought and what the people in the village thought and wanted. Religion was very much part of our life, a very important part of our life. Things like Palm Sunday, the villagers would get together and weave these very intricate palm fronds for bringing to the church. In Marinduque itself was known nationwide as the place for the Moriones festival at Easter time. This was Holy Week, when villagers or people in Marinduque would dress up in these costumes of the Roman soldiers, and they would reenact the Passion and taking Christ to the cross. And this brought a lot of tourists to Marinduque. Christ is being followed by the soldiers, and they loved They loved being hung on the cross. And this was a very important part of their life. The interesting thing was, when I was doing things about family planning and contraception and things that would terminate pregnancy, I think, wow, this is a Catholic country. They're very strongly Catholic. And they would say to me, "Oh, Jay, don't worry. The influence of the church stops at the cathedral door." Very pragmatic people, very pragmatic. And the Manila elite, who were supposed to be providing the services, didn't understand that. And they were trying to convince people that they should try to limit their pregnancies rather than trying to provide them with the services that would allow them to address that issue. The other nice thing about, for me at least, the Catholic Church, was the fact that the Padre in white always had a very fine big bottle of Johnny Walker Scotch. If you wanted a drink, you went to the Padre's birthday party. It was marvelous. The only place in the island where I could get Scotch. It was so good. We had he came to the village and was in one of the houses meeting with some of the people. And I went down to visit and to get a little drink. And a typhoon came through. Oh boy. We had 8 hours of horizontal wind and rain. And I'm in the village with the Padre drinking scotch and having a good time telling stories. And my wife and my daughter are at the Misianos. And the Misianos have these big piles of bags of rice, which they have to get from the downstairs where it's going to flood up to the second floor. Well, I can tell you it was a very frosty reception for me the next morning when I went home, and my wife explained to me what she and Mrs. Misiano had to do to save the rice crop. Anyway, Padres were great fun. We did have some visitors. I had a classmate from the University of Hawaii who lived together in the same little complex. They had a daughter, Anita, who was Allison's age. They were going out to Surabaya in East Java. Hayward was going to do his doctoral research on the history of Surabaya during the War of Independence. Well, we were en route between Hawaii and Indonesia and said, "Oh, we'll come visit." So the Fredericks come trooping to our village, and we had a wonderful visit. Whoops, that's not in the right place. We had, okay, let me just back up a little bit. We did a lot of traveling. We were able to travel between islands. And the New Year's that we were there, we traveled to Luzon, the main island, and spent Christmas and New Year's in the village with these friends of ours from the village. We had to get back to Lucena City, which was the big port city that had the ferry that would go to Marinduque. We had to get back on Route 1. This was the national highway between that on Luzon Island. We had a little bit of rain that time, and the highway sort of washed out. And this is what it looked like. There was someone who did have a big vehicle, tractor that could pull us out, but we were stuck. We arrived there just as the sun was going down. We spent the whole night sitting on the bus. We couldn't move. The next morning, we decided we can't stay on the bus, so we decided we would walk to the next town and wait for the bus there. So I had Allison on my back, and we were walking, I don't know, maybe 5-10 kilometers to the next village where we were welcomed. They gave us a place to sleep, they fed us. We waited there for the bus to come because we had left our bags, our luggage on the bus. And this finally came through, and we were finally able to make our way back to Lucena and get home. But it was a somewhat harrowing experience. The visitors, the Fredericks, as I was saying, from Hawaii, came to visit. And one of the things we decided to do was to take a hike up into the mountains of Marinduque. So Hayward, Peter, myself were hiking up into these beautiful, beautiful mountains without any people, without anything, just villages that were sort of subsistence level. They were growing what they needed to eat. They didn't, maybe they had some coconuts that they would sell the copra from. Hayward thought it would be great to thank our village for the visit by getting a goat and having a big party. Oh, up in the village, up in the mountains, we found this goat, and Hayward paid for the goat. Peter got to carry the goat down to our home, and the goat became, unfortunately, part of the family. You feed a goat, you've got a 2-year-old, the goat doesn't get eaten. So we had this goat, and it was a lovely thing, but it was saved primarily because of Allison and her love of animals. Just before we left, the villagers built for us on the seashore what they call a Bahai Kubo. Just a simple house, thatched roof. We could go down there in the evening, sit, sleep over there if we wanted, be there in the early morning when the fishermen came in with their fish, build a little fire on the seashore, and have a wonderful meal with tuba, vinegar stuff that we drank from the tree. It was a lovely paradise in many ways. Difficult, but very much a paradise. We did have to leave, ultimately, after 14 months. We decided to have a picture taken in front of the Misiano's house, which we would give. We gave every member of the village that we had worked with over the year a picture of our family. In addition, we went and we took pictures of each family. We got them rounded up, get good clothes on, take a picture of the family. We gave that to each family member as a thank you for being so helpful with us. The last thing we did, of course, we had lived there for 14 months. We had accumulated a bunch of stuff. We had a raffle. Everything we had that we weren't going to take back to Hawaii, we raffled. We had a kerosene refrigerator, very expensive, an Electrolux that operated on a kerosene lamp. We had the goat. We had Allison's clothing. We had all sorts of stuff that we sold, that we raffled in the village, and that was truly our thank you to the village. The last thing that got raffled were my old muddy shoes. And the widow, one of the widows of the village, about 80 years old, got that prize. And she looked at that and she said, "What am I going to do with that?" Well, I'll tell you, I went back to the village several years later, and she still had those shoes, which she sort of displayed as part of her recognition of who we were and what her role had been in our whole experience. Last thing we did, Christmas, gotta have Santa Claus. Jay's Santa Claus, riding the back of a carabao, passing out candies to the children. This was closure on our work in the Philippines. Been back several times to that same village. Every time I come back, people bring to me the picture that I gave them of their family, and they tell me each of the kids that we see in the pictures have grown, what they're doing. We became very much part of that community. And so that was doing research in the Philippines. Didn't learn much about my research, it was fine. Did get my doctorate, and here I am today. Before you go, I would like to introduce to you the star of all of this, my daughter, Allison. Please stand and say hello. This is the 2-year-old. This is the 2-year-old who won the hearts and minds of the Filipinos. Thank you, Allison, for being what you are and who you are. Okay, any questions, please?
Okay, I have a question.
Yes, Dick?
The study that you did on different means of controlling, I guess, population expansion and so on, what were your outcomes of that? What was your summation, observation? Maybe a go forward? Oh.
The outcome was a dissertation. The outcome was 3 letters in front of my name, PhD.
No summary, okay. 25 words or less?
25 words or less. I found that physical distance makes a difference in how much communication people have with each other. The closer people are to each other, the more communication they have. The further apart they are, the less they communicate. So, rule number 1, get the people together, talk to them, and they'll talk among themselves. And that became very much a principle of many of the rural family planning programs. Bring the people together, and they'll talk among themselves. Yes, ma'am, Sandy.
My question is really for you, Allison. Do you remember the stories that your dad was telling? Are most of them familiar to you by now?
Take your mask off.
Stand back here.
I have a 13-year-old in school, so it's
Push
good
your
to
mic
have my
up close to your face.
good to have my mask on. I do have some recollection. I do remember standing on the table and dancing for candy. I have a very distinct memory of that, but not so many recollections of the Philippines. I remember having the things that you remember as a child. I remember having a terrible earache and going to the Shields in Manila, and they had, as Dad said, air conditioning and running water, and I remember that being this like sanctuary. That's the the extent that I have memory of it. May I ask a question while I have?
You're going to ask a question of me? We could do that at home.
How did you determine reproductive age from 15 to 48?
Was written up in research. We want women of reproductive age, and it was determined that women aged 14 to 48 were reproductive. If you're outside of that age range, you don't get pregnant. Well, we know that that's not true. But that was the general standard. That was the women of reproductive age.
Got a question? You might like to know that Allison lives right in downtown Kalamazoo. From the Philippines to Kalamazoo.
And Hawaii in between.
Interestingly, my husband was stationed at Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines at the same time they were. And when we left and went to Taiwan for a vacation, when on our return, I was forced to sign a statement that I had no contraceptive devices or information on my person. That's how much hold the Catholic Church had on the Filipinos.
One of the researchers that I worked with in Manila said to me, Jay, if you ever talk about abortion, I will have you thrown out of the country. This was in the very early days, but shortly after I left, President Marcos and Mrs. Marcos had a competition between them on who could recruit most family planning acceptors. So it did become acceptable, but in those early days, no.
Other questions? Oh, here we go. I don't know if this is a question, Jay, but part of just a small research that I did in Colombia, in much the same period, involved discovering how, contrary to expectations, the Colombian people were very receptive to all kinds of birth control, including pills, but also including abortion. This in the face of the Catholic Church, which in Colombia had the reputation of being all powerful. But as some of the women in our barrio in Colombia said, right, all the padres want is the fees that they get from the baptism. So they had a healthy disregard for the padres, and were much more ready to accept international Planned Parenthood initiatives and support for promoting birth control. And thank goodness they were, because Colombia had one of the highest birth rates in the world at that point. And the receptivity of the people enabled the country really to maintain the population sort of within somewhat reasonable bounds. So it was just a interestingly parallel situation, I think, to the one that you've described.
Thank you. Yes, it's funny, you know, my work is in the field of geography, social geography. I've done absolutely nothing with the research that I did, but I went into the work of population with the UN, and it was primarily, I went into that because of this discrepancy between what the program managers in the capital city perceived to be the need in the village and what the villagers were telling me about what they were doing in terms of trying to limit their fertility. They were doing what the managers wanted, but the managers couldn't see that because the villagers are stupid. All they want to do is have babies. So I got into this field of population thinking, okay, this would be a good thing for me to do, try to bridge that gap, try to make sure that those who are providing the services actually meet the needs of the people who want the services. I was told, and it's a side story, I was told when I went to South Africa, you know, South Africa had its apartheid program, the blacks and the whites. They had a very successful family planning program instituted by the white government because they wanted to get the black numbers down. So it was very much geared to enslavement, if you will, of the blacks. When I was assigned, I was a white man in a black division of headquarters, the UN, going to South Africa where it had this hatred of whites. I was told by my black managers, Jay, don't get involved in family planning. So I got to South Africa, and I'm gingerly getting around, and I'm going out with some researchers from the university to the villages. And I'm asking the village women, what is it that they want? They said, don't stop the family planning program. We want family planning. You want family planning? Yes, it's the first freedom we have ever had. It gives us the right and the ability to choose our own way of life. How many children we want. Give us that freedom. It was a real eye-opener.
Thank you, Dr. J, for an informative and interesting program. Our December 7th, a day that will live in infamy, is a program by Judge Carolyn Williams, who will present Life as a Recovery